Hey guys, what's up? Excoundrel here, and welcome to my video looking at Kinetic. We're going to be talking about build paths for her and giving you a brief overview of her play as well as some gameplay that I had previously today. So, Kinetic, new hero to Vainglory. I really like Kinetic because she's simple, and I think that's something that should be never overstated. Having a simple hero is always a good thing for a game, because not everybody wants these super complex heroes. Some people just want a hero that shoots a giant gun, and that's kind of what Kinetic does, and I really like that. I think it makes her a fun hero to play as long as you can get those skill shots landing. She's really, really cool. So, we're going to start with her ability maxes. Now, I would say that you would always max A first, then max B, both CP and weapon power. The simple fact of it is that A is your bread and butter skill. By maxing it, you're going to get a huge cooldown reduction on it, and you're going to allow it to come up more frequently, meaning that especially as CP, you're going to be able to land the majority of your damage more quickly. B, if you max it, is going to give you a stun on your A, so obviously that's going to have some sort of positive effect on your overdrive, and actually B is the only skill of her kit that gives you a overdrive effect. Like a lot of heroes in Vainglory give you an overdrive effect, the way it interacts with other skills or gives something extra to that skill specifically. None of Kinetic's skills, apart from her B, has an overdrive effect. Most of them are either just increase in damage, lower cooldowns, whatever. And the reason that we don't max her ultimate is for the simple reason that if you go from level 2 to 3, the only thing that you get for her ultimate is an extra max 200 damage, because the base damage only goes up by 100, but obviously if you've got 4 tracer shots, you're going to get an extra 100 on top of that. And you only get a minus 10 seconds on cooldown, which if you're going to have cooldown reduction, which most people end up building in the CP build path, and a lot of people like to build the spell sword on her weapon power path, you're going to get cooldown reduction anyway there, so that's going to become less of an issue anyway. So with the fact that the crystal ratio and the weapon ratio stays the same, it's actually just not worth maxing her ultimate. It's actually just her worst skill to get 3 points in. The other two are just far better to invest the resources into. Okay, so Kinetic has got two specific build paths that work. There is a CP build path and a weapon power build path, obviously, and she's viable in both of them. Now, she takes a while to scale up on both paths, so she's not an early game hero. In fact, her early game CP build path is really, really crap, simply because she's got no wave clear. And the fact that she's got no wave clear means that she's going to get shoved in by pretty much any other CP mid laner in the game, and that's going to make her very vulnerable to losing map pressure, especially in high elo games. So what you'll find is you'll need a lot of help from your captain to make sure that you are constantly trying to outpressure your opponent. One of the benefits that she does have in lane as the CP build path is that she's very good at trading. If you can ignore wave clear and you can land an A, use your B and land another A, you can actually out-trade most heroes at most levels, and that is something that does make CP Kinetic very good in the laning phase. But overall, if the enemy laner is playing safe and just clearing waves and shoving you in, you are going to struggle. So the build path that I like to go for is either Shatterglass or Dragon's Eye, depending on what I'm going up against. I'll pick Shatterglass versus very low health and low defense carries that I want to be able to burst, especially in the late game. And I'll pick Dragon's Eye if they've got a big, beefy front line, tanks that need me to stack up before I start to do any real damage. The rest of the build path is pretty set for me, although you can vary it how you see fit. I like to go Spellfire second. It gives me a really good mid-game spike. It synergizes really well with the cooldown on my A being about 2 seconds, meaning that every time I hit an A, I'm going to get the Spellfire damage off. And then I'll go Broken Myth next if I'm facing up against a lot of shielding, like Aegis is being built at like 10 to 15 minutes. Or Clockwork if I need the extra mobility from my B, or if I'm playing very squishy heroes and I just want to be able to spam my A and do more damage. So both of those are considerations, but the overall build path should look something like this for me. And this makes Kinetic really strong in the late game. She scales up, she does almost 1,000 damage per A, the empowered A does a lot more damage, and so she really starts to hit pretty hard, especially when you've got all of that CP behind you. Obviously consider a Frostburn, but honestly it's not the best item for her because the only thing that applies it is your ultimate and your A. You don't get any CP application from your basic attacks, and obviously your B doesn't actually do any direct damage apart from resetting your A cooldown. So Frostburn is like a last resort if you're really struggling to kite, or you just want to make sure that you facilitate someone else in a team fight. But this is the build path that I would stick to. It works for most situations for Kinetic, and I think you guys should have a lot of easy fun with this one. Alright, moving on to weapon power, and actually according to high elo European players, weapon power Kinetic is really strong. Now, you have to build her very much like a Vox, because Kinetic is all about scaling. Now, if you get to 3 items with Kinetic on her weapon power build path, it's going to look something like, I would go usually Sorrow Blade, Poison Shift, Breaking Point, and that's very much a Vox-orientated build. You could go Sorrow Blade, Serpent's Mask Breaking Point as well, but Breaking Point really is the core item for Kinetic, and that's because her heroic perk, Tracer Shots, they deal more damage the more stacks you have. Those stacks take time to build up because you need to hit your A's in team fights, and therefore, once you have 4 stacks and you have Breaking Point, you start to stack Breaking Point really, really, really quickly. And because she's got a little bit of mobility in her kit, she's got a high base movement speed and a high attack range. She's got the 2nd highest attack range in the game, by the way. She can kite pretty well as well. So she's really one of these big, heavy, kiting weapon power carries, and that makes her really good with the likes of Lorelei and Arden as well, because they facilitate that. Obviously, you can go Spell Sword instead of Sorrow Blade 2 if you really need to get the extra cooldown on your B, or you're really bad at hitting your A consecutively and want to get that cooldown reduction to make sure you can land those A's more readily. One of the problems that I see with weapon power Kinetic, though, is that she's very difficult to play. There is lots of other things that you need to consider on top of just basic attacking someone. If you play the likes of Ringo or Vox, a lot of it is just like, where am I going to position? Let's make sure I keep basic attacking. With Kinetic, when you play weapon power, you need to make sure you're landing your A, you need to make sure you're using your B at the right time and then landing your A again in a good situation. And then you need to make sure you're maintaining Tracer Shots as well, because Tracer Shots, the stacks of Tracer Shots, are the absolute core reason that weapon power Kinetic actually works, and works so well with Breaking Point. There are other build paths you could consider. She doesn't really excel in the burst damage area because her base weapon power is a lot lower than most weapon power carries. It only scales up to about 96 compared to someone like Ringo, who scales up to about 132, 134. But the passive from Tornado Trigger works really well with the fact that she really likes to kite, and that allows her to build space to allow her to constantly hit her A's and stack up those Tracer Shots. So you could go for a full Critical Strike build path, although I don't think it works as well as the Vox style build path with the Poison Shiv and the Breaking Point. Or you could go Tornado Trigger into Breaking Point. The overall damage output is lower, but the Tornado Trigger passive will help you kite better, and that might facilitate you to do well in team fights where you stack up using your Tracer Shots more than relying on basic attacks without Tracer Shots. But do remember, you need to hit your A's to make it work. Alright, CP or weapon power. Let's have a look at the benefits of both of them. The CP suits long range, you've got really good poke, and it scales really well with CP items. What this means is that in the late game, you can be almost untouchable because of your range. You can poke people out using Spellfire really easily as well. You've got a gap closer or an escape in the form of your B. Obviously, it's fairly low mobility because you only get one of them probably every 10 seconds in the late game, especially with Clockwork. But overall, she's a pretty mobile CP carry. Let's have a look at weapon power now. She's got a really long range. Actually, if you look at her range, it's 6.4. The only other person I think in the game that's got a longer range at base is Saw, who's got a range of 6.6. So she's got a very long attack range. She also has good attack speed scaling. It's very similar to Vox and Ringo, so she's got really good attack speed scaling, so she'll work well with attack speed items. And also, she really scales well into long damage fights. She excels at sustaining and excels at building Breaking Point as long as you are maintaining the passive Tracer stacks. So, overall, she is a really good elongated teamfight carry, and that's something that you should consider when building her weapon power. But obviously, both of these two styles of play do have cons, and this is something that you should consider. With her CP, she's very reliant on hitting her A. If you can't land your skill shots, you're not going to do any damage. She's got no mobility outside of her B, so if you use your B in a wrong situation, you're very vulnerable to assassins, and that will make you an easy target for them. And something that probably guts her harder than anything else is that she has got such terrible wave clear in her CP build path. We talked about it earlier. The problem with her is because you've only got your A and then your basic attacks. None of them can pass through minions. It doesn't do splash damage. You have to take out each minion individually, and that means that most other CP laners are going to shove you, and they're going to make your life a living hell, especially if they start to roam the map. Having a look at weapon power, some of her cons. She needs her Tracer stacks to be good. So, like, all of her gameplay relies on essentially hitting good Tracer stacks. Her burst damage is also pretty low, and again, we've talked about this before. You do require breaking point, and the fact that you've got such low base weapon power means that you're not going to be very good with the critical strike build path if you don't have your tracer stacks built. She's got low base weapon power scaling, so you do need to, again, rely on your passive. And again, the same reason as her CP build path. If you use your A, B in the wrong situation, she's got pretty much no mobility outside of that, and that will make her vulnerable to a lot of the other sort of weapon power killing carries like weapon power Black Feather or Taka. So the other thing that we also need to mention, I talked about it in the weapon power build path, is that her skill ceiling is really high. She's not a normal weapon power carry. She relies on really good positioning, juggling your passive, hitting your A, using your B at the right time. She's a very tough weapon power carry to get involved with, but because of her long range, she's very good at abusing people in lane. She can stay safer than a lot of other weapon power carries in team fights because of that range, and she scales up, like I said, and does insane damage when the fight goes on. So what is she weak versus? She's very bad versus everything else that you'd expect a low mobility carry to be bad versus. Weapon power Blackfeather, Cruel, Taka, all of them will be a pain for Kinetic. She's good with anybody that facilitates carries that need kiting. So things like Arden, Lorelei, Grace. She works well with all of these captains, and those are ones that you should look to choose if you see a Kinetic on your team. Who is she good versus? It's very difficult to tell right now. Because the fact her laning phase is so bad, she just gets to the late game where she starts to pretty much out-damage most people on a considerable basis because of how well her A scales. And it's very difficult to know who she's good against with her weapon power carry variant. So right now, it's really difficult to tell who Kinetic is good versus, but we'll update when we get there. So, that is everything that we have for Kinetic, although we haven't really talked about her combos. Her combos are pretty easy because she's a pretty simple hero. You use A, then you use B, and then you use A again, because obviously B resets your A. So you want to use B as soon as you can after using your first A, so make sure that when you use that A, you're ready to reposition in the right area. Use your B to get the instant cooldown reset on your A, and you basically get 2 A's for free. And that's quite a lot of damage in the CP build path, but also gives you a good way, especially if you've overdriven your B, to kite as it stuns the enemy hero that you're kiting away from. And so that's a really good self-peel tool to use. The other combo is making sure that you've got 3 or 4 tracer stacks and then using your ultimate only in that situation, otherwise it's a bit of a waste. You get between 75 and 100% extra bonus damage if you've got those tracer stacks for your ultimate, so you want to make sure you're juggling those as much as you can. Really practice hitting your skill shots with this person. Kinetic needs you to land her A to be good, so if you aren't good at hitting skill shots, this is the perfect hero to practice with because you absolutely need to succeed with her. Alright guys, I'll see you soon. Thanks very much.